Last Friday, I hear, is coming.
Me, Ice Cube, Aaron McGruder, and DJ Pooh were just together sitting in a room writing this movie. This movie gonna be crazy.
25 years later, Ice Cube is finally speaking on something fans assumed was gone for good. Last Friday is now officially moving in development after years of silence, stalled drafts, and constant uncertainty around its future. Warner Brothers, the film studio behind the movie, has reopened the door, and Ice Cube is back at the center as Craig Jones in what is shaping up to be the most anticipated chapter of the franchise. What finally changed behind the scenes after years of silence? And why is this the moment everything comes together? Join us as we uncover the story behind Ice Cube's final confirmation after 25 years of waiting. The official confirmation. After years of rumors, rejected scripts, and constant uncertainty surrounding the franchise, Ice Cube has officially confirmed that Last Friday is finally moving forward. The confirmation became real once New Line Cinema publicly revealed that a new deal had been completed with Ice Cube to write and star in the film, marking the first major studio-backed progress the sequel has seen in decades. For longtime fans, the announcement immediately felt bigger than a normal sequel update, because Friday was never just another comedy franchise. The original 1995 film started as a small neighborhood story built around Craig Jones, a young man trying to survive one chaotic Friday in South Central Los Angeles after losing his job. The plot itself was simple. Craig owed money to a local drug dealer, Smokey kept making everything worse, and the entire day slowly spiraled into one unpredictable situation after another. But what made the movie stand out was not the storyline alone. It was the world surrounding it. Ice Cube and DJ Pooh created a version of South Central that felt lived in rather than exaggerated. The movie did not rely on giant set pieces or overproduced comedy. Most of the action happened on a single block, with people sitting on porches, arguing across fences, walking down sidewalks, and reacting to the same neighborhood drama everybody already knew about. That grounded style gave the film a kind of authenticity audiences instantly connected with. At the center of everything was the chemistry between Ice Cube's Craig and Chris Tucker's Smokey. Their conversations became the heartbeat of the film. Smokey's non-stop chaos constantly collided with Craig's calmer personality, creating a dynamic that shaped some of the most quoted comedy scenes of the 1990s. Around them were significant characters that turned the neighborhood itself into part of the story. What began as a modest comedy unexpectedly became one of the most influential black films of its era. The movie exploded through word of mouth, home video, cable television, and eventually internet culture. Entire generations grew up repeating lines from Friday without even realizing how old the movie actually was. Scenes from the film continued circulating online decades later, turning Craig and Smokey into permanent cultural figures long after the original release. The franchise expanded with Next Friday in 2000 and Friday After Next in 2002, introducing new characters while keeping the same neighborhood-driven energy. Mike Epps' arrival as Day-Day helped carry the series forward after Chris Tucker exited the franchise, and the films gradually became part of a larger comedy legacy tied directly to black cinema and hip-hop culture. It was a loud hit that went beyond comprehension. That history is exactly why the confirmation of Last Friday matters so much now. The franchise never disappeared from public memory. Fans continued quoting it, revisiting it, and asking about another sequel for over 20 years. But after so much silence, many people genuinely believed the story would never continue. Now, for the first time in decades, the final chapter is officially moving forward with Ice Cube back at the center of it all, and fans genuinely believe they are going to see it. What changed behind the scenes was not just Ice Cube's persistence to continue the show, but a shift inside Warner Brothers itself that finally made the project possible after years of silence. Why Warner Brothers finally said yes? For more than a decade, Last Friday kept running into the same wall. Ice Cube wanted the movie made. Fans demanded it constantly, and scripts reportedly already existed, yet Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema never gave the project full approval.
The issue was New Line. They didn't want to do the movie the way I wanted it done.
The situation became one of the strangest stalemates in Hollywood because the Friday franchise was still enormously popular long after the last film released in 2002. Ice Cube spoke openly about the frustration over the years. He revealed multiple times that he had submitted sequel scripts to the studio, only for them to be rejected or ignored during executive turnover. Different leadership teams came and went inside Warner Brothers, and every transition pushed the project further into uncertainty. At one point, Ice Cube even admitted he became tired of discussing the movie publicly because the same conversations kept repeating without progress. Part of the problem came down to control. Ice Cube was never interested in handing the franchise over to people who did not understand why the original films connected with audiences. Friday was not built around expensive action scenes or franchise spectacle. The appeal came from the dialogue, the neighborhood atmosphere, and the chemistry between characters who felt authentic. Ice reportedly refused to make a sequel that existed purely to exploit nostalgia, while stripping away the identity that made the series important in the first place. The studio's priorities also shifted repeatedly throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Mid-budget comedies stopped receiving the same theatrical support they once did, especially R-rated black comedies. Hollywood moved toward superhero franchises, global action films, and streaming content. Movies like Friday, which depended heavily on character interactions and cultural specificity, became harder to finance under major studios focused on billion-dollar franchises. Then, the entertainment industry changed again. Studios started realizing the long-term value of legacy properties with loyal fan bases. Franchises from the 1990s and early 2000s suddenly became profitable again because audiences wanted familiar stories tied to recognizable characters. At the same time, streaming and social media revealed how culturally alive Friday still was. Clips from the original film continued going viral decades later. Memes built around Smokey, Debo, and Pops never disappeared from internet culture. Younger audiences who were not even alive when the first movie released still knew the quotes. That renewed value became impossible for Warner Brothers to ignore. The biggest shift happened when Michael DeLuca became co-chair of Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group. Michael DeLuca already had history with New Line Cinema during the original Friday era, which meant he understood the franchise beyond box office numbers. Michael, who understood the cultural impact of Friday, reportedly reopened conversations with Ice Cube after taking over the studio's film division alongside Pamela Abdy. Ice Cube later explained that the new leadership immediately started asking direct questions about why last Friday had not happened yet, something that hadn't happened in years. That conversation reopened negotiations in a serious way for the first time in years. The deaths of key cast members also changed the urgency surrounding the sequel. The death of a major cast member in 2019, in particular, forced everyone involved to confront the reality that time was running out. Ice publicly expressed regret that previous studio delays prevented them from showing up like they would one final time. That emotional loss reportedly added pressure to stop postponing the movie indefinitely. Eventually, Warner Brothers stopped treating Last Friday like a risky nostalgia project and started recognizing it as unfinished cultural history. That difference is what finally pushed the movie forward after years of delays and stalled negotiations. With the project finally moving forward, attention quickly shifts from approval to participation. The biggest question now becomes who is actually coming back and who is still missing from the lineup. Who's returning and who still hasn't signed on? The moment Last Friday became official, fans immediately started asking one question before anything else. Who is actually coming back? The answer is complicated because the franchise has changed dramatically since Friday After Next was released in 2002. Some cast members are officially returning, others remain uncertain, and several of the people who helped define the series are no longer alive, which gives the sequel a completely different emotional weight from the earlier films. One thing is confirmed: Ice Cube is returning as Craig Jones. He is also writing and producing the film, which means the creative direction remains in the hands of the person who built the franchise from the beginning. That matters because Ice Cube has spent years resisting pressure to make a sequel that felt lazy or disconnected from the original films. His involvement guarantees that Last Friday will not be handed off to outside writers trying to imitate the older movies without understanding them. Mike Epps is also officially returning as Day Day. Mike publicly revealed that Ice personally contacted him after the Warner Brothers deal was finalized. Ice Cube and Mike Epps have recently resurfaced together around the franchise's 30th anniversary momentum.
We're gonna celebrate Friday. It's 31 years since the Friday franchise came out.
Giving fans a rare public glimpse of their chemistry outside the films. Ice Cube represents the original Friday era, while Mike Epps carries the sequel run that expanded the story after. Their reunion has felt easy and familiar, shaped by years of shared history in the series rather than anything forced for publicity. It also reinforces the idea that Last Friday is being framed as a full-circle moment, where the earlier and later chapters of the franchise finally connect in one final return. Their reunion is a major part of why excitement around the movie exploded online. After Chris Tucker, who played Smokey, exited the franchise following the first film, Mike became the series' second breakout star. Day Day helped carry Next Friday and Friday After Next, and many fans now see him as just as essential to the franchise's identity as Smokey himself. The biggest unanswered question remains Chris Tucker. Chris Tucker turned the original Friday into a cultural phenomenon. Even people who have never seen the full movie still recognize Smokey quotes and scenes. But Chris famously declined to return for Next Friday, later explaining that he wanted to move away from heavy marijuana-centered comedy after becoming more religious. He didn't want to cuss or smoke weed on camera anymore, said Ice Cube. For years, fans assumed the relationship between Chris and the franchise was permanently over, but the situation appears very different now. Ice Cube has repeatedly stated that he wants Chris involved in Last Friday.
We've talking to him, and he wants to come back.
He's one of the best. I think he's gonna do it.
He has never publicly closed the door on Smokey's return. In recent interviews, Ice sounded optimistic rather than dismissive when discussing Chris Tucker's possible involvement. Industry listings connected to the project have included Chris's name attached to Smokey, though no official contract has been announced publicly. That distinction matters because fans online often confuse discussions with confirmed casting. Right now, Chris is being actively pursued, but he is not legally committed to the film. That uncertainty has created enormous anticipation because Smokey's return would instantly transform the movie into a full-circle reunion. Craig and Smokey have not shared the screen in a Friday film since 1995. Bringing them back together after more than 30 years would become one of the biggest moments in the franchise's history. At the same time, the movie is reportedly introducing younger comedians into the cast as well. Names like DC Young Fly have circulated heavily around the project, although some of those reports remain unofficial. The direction itself appears intentional. Ice Cube understands that Last Friday cannot survive on nostalgia alone. The film needs fresh energy alongside the returning veterans. That balance is what makes the casting story so important. This is not simply about recreating old scenes or replaying famous jokes. The sequel is trying to close one era of the franchise while introducing another generation into the world that made Friday legendary in the first place. As the cast picture comes into focus, the conversation naturally turns to those who can no longer return, and how the film plans to acknowledge the actors who helped shape its legacy. Honoring the lost cast members. One of the clearest shifts in Last Friday compared to earlier installments is tone. The franchise that once thrived purely on neighborhood comedy now carries the weight of time. Between 2002 and today, several key figures who helped shape Friday passed away, and that reality has become impossible for Ice Cube or Warner Brothers to ignore in the final chapter. John Witherspoon stands at the center of that legacy. Known as Willie Jones on the show and nicknamed Pops, he became one of the most recognizable characters in the series. His timing, delivery, and chaotic wisdom turned simple scenes into long-lasting cultural moments. After a long-suffering heart attack, John passed away in 2019 at his home in Sherman Oaks.
John Witherspoon, who had a prolific Hollywood career, died yesterday in Los Angeles.
Ice Cube has publicly acknowledged that his absence left a gap that could not be replaced or rewritten around. Instead of trying to recreate Pops with a new actor, the approach now being discussed focuses on acknowledging his presence as part of Craig's world rather than removing him from it. Tommy "Tiny" Lister Jr., who played Debo, also remains a major part of the franchise's history. Debo was never just a villain. He became a symbol of physical intimidation mixed with comedic exaggeration. and his presence defined several of the most memorable scenes in Friday. Tommy passed away in 2020, and his character's impact is expected to be referenced in a way that reflects how deeply he shaped the neighborhood dynamic within the story universe. Anthony Johnson is another cast member known for playing Izal, who contributed a different kind of energy. His role represented unpredictability and street-level chaos that added texture to the world around Craig and Smokey. Anthony's passing in 2021 added another emotional layer to the franchise's legacy, especially for fans who associated him with some of the most quoted lines in the series. Yvette Wilson, who played Rita, also remains part of that memory. Although her role was smaller in later entries, she helped establish the social world surrounding the main characters during the early years of the franchise. Her passing in 2012 marked one of the earliest losses tied to the original Friday universe. Rather than ignoring these absences, Last Friday is reportedly structured to acknowledge them directly within the story. The approach is not about turning the film into a memorial, but about allowing the characters to exist in a world where time has actually passed. Rather than pausing the story to highlight loss, the film is expected to treat it as part of everyday reality in Craig's world. The characters who are no longer there are not rewritten or replaced, and the narrative doesn't stop to explain their absence in a heavy-handed way. Instead, their influence lingers through memory, references, and the way the neighborhood itself has evolved. That approach keeps the story moving forward while still acknowledging that time has passed and nothing remains exactly as it once was. Craig is no longer a young man navigating one chaotic day like before. He is older, and that needs to be considered. That shift also changes how humor functions in the film. Earlier Friday movies relied on fast-paced, situational comedy rooted in daily neighborhood interactions. The new installment is expected to blend that style with quieter, reflective moments that recognize absence without stopping the story's momentum. It is a balance between remembering what made the franchise iconic and accepting that the world it came from no longer exists in the same form. That decision gives Last Friday a different emotional foundation. It is no longer just about returning to the block. It is about returning to a place filled with memory, change, and the people who helped define it. With that sense of time passing, it sets up a final chapter that feels like closure rather than continuation. The perfect ending. Every long-running film series eventually reaches a point where the biggest question is no longer what comes next, but how it ends. For Friday, that question carries unusual weight because the franchise was never designed with an ending in mind. It started as a self-contained story in 1995, expanded into sequels based on popularity, then quietly stopped after Friday After Next in 2002. Now, more than 2 decades later, Last Friday is being positioned in a way that feels less like another installment and more like a deliberate closing statement. What makes the final film concept different is the expectation that it will not rely on a return to familiar chaos. Earlier entries were built around a single day spiraling out of control, driven by street-level problems, unpredictable neighbors, and escalating comedic tension. A final chapter cannot simply replay that structure without feeling repetitive. Instead, the direction being discussed around the project points toward resolution through contrast rather than escalation. Craig Jones is no longer being written as someone trying to survive a Friday. The character is now expected to exist in a world where survival is no longer the main concern. That shift changes the entire rhythm of the story. Instead of everything happening in a compressed burst of events, the narrative is positioned to unfold with more space, where moments carry consequence. This is not because they escalate, but because they reveal how much has changed since the beginning. One of the most important structural expectations surrounding Last Friday is the return to a transformed South Central. The neighborhood is no longer the same environment that defined the original film. Over time, parts of Los Angeles have changed through redevelopment, cultural shifts, and economic pressure that reshaped entire blocks. The film is expected to use that transformation as a storytelling device rather than a backdrop. Craig is not simply returning home. He is returning to a place that remembers him differently than he remembers it. That contrast creates space for the film's central tension. The people, spaces, and routines that once defined daily life in Friday movies no longer function in the same way. What used to feel normal now feels displaced. That allows the story to explore comedy from a new angle, where humor comes from adjustment instead of repetition. The block is familiar in memory, but unfamiliar in practice. Mike Epps' return as Day-Day adds another layer to that structure. His character represents a different phase of the franchise's evolution, and placing him alongside an older Craig creates a dual perspective on time. Their dynamic is no longer about getting through a chaotic day. It becomes about how two people who lived through that era interpret where life has taken them. That shift alone changes how every interaction is framed, because their shared history now sits underneath everything they say and do. There's also the unresolved presence of Smokey, which functions less as casting speculation and more as narrative pressure. Whether Chris Tucker appears or not, the character represents the origin point of the franchise's cultural identity. His absence or return becomes part of the story's emotional structure either way. If he does not return, that absence itself becomes meaningful. If he does, it becomes the final reconnection to where everything started. The film does not need to resolve that question in advance for it to carry weight on screen. What defines a potential ending for Friday is not a dramatic conclusion in the traditional sense. It is the possibility of letting the characters exist long enough for their story to settle. That means allowing Craig's return to feel less like a new adventure and more like a final walk through a place that shaped him. It means letting interactions unfold without forcing them into the fast-paced structure that defined earlier films. The idea of closure here is not built on big speeches or final confrontations. It is built on recognition of how far the characters have come, how much the world has changed, and how certain moments cannot be recreated without losing what made them meaningful in the first place. That is what separates this from a typical sequel. If Last Friday succeeds in the way fans are hoping, it will not feel like a continuation trying to extend a franchise. It will feel like a deliberate final chapter that understands exactly what it is closing. A story that began with a single day in a neighborhood may end with something quieter, where the significance is not in what happens next, but in the fact that the story is finally allowed to stop. Do you think Last Friday will finally deliver the closure fans have been waiting decades for? And can Ice Cube truly bring back the magic of the original era in a way that feels complete? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.